morning. This is Richard Wexler, and this is Caring in America, the podcast for caregivers and care recipients. Reminding you folks, the ones that have been with me for a long time, the new listeners, 20 years ago, minding my own business, working in Silicon Valley in the software industry, married later, two small kids. My wife and I have all four parents between the two of us. We think they're doing great, and we find out in the summer of '05 they're not. Phone call after phone call after phone call, which starts us on an adventure of taking care of them for 14 years until the last parent passes at 96 in 2019. So go back to '05, realized I could barely spell the word care, left what I was doing in software, started my first company, Points of Life, started eventually educating all over Northern California where I was living, and then eventually all over the country about the complexities of aging and care. Started this podcast, as you guys know, over 2 years ago. And then earlier this year, with my co founder, Peter Ross, the co founder and CEO of Senior Helpers, we started our foundation, A Plan to Age. So we have two special guests with us this morning. We're going to be talking about a pretty serious event, and that's a deadly fire that took place in the fall of 2017. And what I'm going to do first is have them introduce themselves. Anne, are you there?
I am here. Thank you. My name is Ann Belden. I run the journalism program at Santa Rosa Junior College, and I am co author of the book Inflamed Abandonment, Heroism, and Outrage in Wine Country's Deadliest Firestorm.
And I'm Paul Gullickson. I am co-author with Ann on the book, and I'm currently head of communications for the County of Sonoma, located just north of San Francisco. But I've spent 35 plus years of my career as a journalist, including 20 years at the Press Democrat. And I was working there during the fires of 2017, which we'll be talking about, and it was during that time that the paper won the Pulitzer Prize for our coverage of the fires that happened at the time. I say that reluctantly because we'd rather have not had the fire and not had the Pulitzer Prize, but we're proud of being recognized for the coverage that occurred at that time. So.
Well, welcome to you both. I know it's early where you guys are in California, so let's kind of set the stage for our audience. And either one of you guys can take this. Tell the audience where these fires took place.
Yeah, and I'll go first if you want.
Yeah, that's great.
So as I noted, Sonoma County, for those who don't know, we're the wine country just north of San Francisco, about an hour away from the Golden Gate Bridge. We're known for our rolling hills of vineyards as well as oak trees and some redwoods. It's a beautiful area for wine tasting and retirement. What happened was on October 8th of 2017, we get these Diablo winds, very strong winds that blow from east to west. And that particular time, we had extreme fire risk. Our vegetation was very dry. Um, and, uh, and on that day, we had very high winds coming, and a power line went down or short circuited in Calistoga, which is to the east of us, and the winds just blew this fire started there, and it just was like a blowtorch. It blew toward Santa Rosa, and it swept over our hills into the town of Santa Rosa, where it's destroyed thousands of homes and took 22 lives. We claim it was actually more than that, but it actually swept from Calistoga into Santa Rosa, jumped a 6-lane highway, and then destroyed a very flat residential community that you would never think would be at risk, called Coffee Park. And it was just devastating. At the time, it was the most devastating, destructive fire in state history. Of course, since then we've had a number of catastrophic events, and we can talk about that too. But this particular story is based on what happened at a retirement. It's based on the whole fire, but it focuses on the events at two retirement complexes, an independent complex known as Verena, and a skilled nursing facility called Villa Capri, where hundreds of residents were essentially abandoned by the staff and the managers, and were left to family members to drive up there with under great courage and save them. So that's the setting and the basics of the story.
Villa Capri's assisted living and memory care. So it was not operating under federal guidelines, just state guidelines at the time.
Let's go back to the setting where both of these are these buildings right next door to each other. How close are they, Paul or Anne?
Yeah, Villa Capri is kind of contained in one building, and its facility Verena is kind of up the hill a little bit, but there's multiple buildings attached to Verena. Villa Capri tended to have more, people in wheelchairs and walkers and needing a little more care than those at Verena, which offered more independent style living, but also assisted living.
Yeah, it was assisted living,
And these are
and they had
both
memory care
very
too.
upscale.
Yeah,
Yeah, these are both very upscale, high-end, facilities, where people paid up to $12,000 a month for care.
Wow. So again, people that may have not been to the wine country, and I would certainly encourage most people at some point in their life to take that journey. Been there multiple times. It's beautiful. Are there a lot of trees where both of those buildings were situated?
actually, yeah, it's a very good question. It's on a ridge just north of Santa Rosa, where there had actually been a devastating wildfire sweep through in 1964, known as the Hanley Fire. And but at the time that the wildfire swept all the way there, went to the highway, but it did not jump the highway back then. It was stopped. But back then there wasn't much up there, but it's some scattered ranches. So when they proposed building along that ridge, there was a lot of debate back in the 2000s, 1990s, about the concern about building on that ridge because of the wildfire risks. But the city essentially waved those concerns off, and they went ahead and built not only these retirement complexes, but there's a number of homes that were built up there. Many of which, most of which, were all destroyed in this fire in 2017.
Wow. So as we've talked about, and Ann, you can correct me on this in a second, Villa Capri, assisted living, memory care. Most people are living there from the assisted living part. They need help with activity of daily living, could be bathrooming, could be dressing, could be different things. Memory care, obviously, there's a need for cognitive problems for memory care, where the other location is independent living, where people may come from the home they've been in, their own home, their own apartment, their own condo, whatever it was. They still may be driving. Is that somewhat of an accurate description, Ann?
Yes, absolutely. There may have been a couple people driving in and out of driving at Villa Capri, but really once they got to the point where they couldn't drive, so and some people would move from Verena to Villa Capri as their care needs increased.
Sure. Which is typical when you start independent and move.
Correct. Sometimes we had situations where a spouse would move to Villa Capri because she or he needed additional care, while the other spouse would stay at Verena nearby, and that was sort of the continuum of care that they were promising there.
Sure. And that's pretty typical as well. Let's start with Verena. One of you guys can answer this. Do you know approximately how many residents were housed there?
There were 228 on the night of the fire, and 62 residing at Villa Capri, though I think only 60 were there the night of the fire.
Okay. And then let's go start with Verena and then go to Villa Capri. Do you have an idea with Verena how many staff were on duty at the time of the fire?
Well, there were only 3 on staff the night of the fire, um, at Verena, and then they had some maintenance workers that the 2 maintenance workers who actually did stay behind and help save, one in particular helped save one, woman in a wheelchair, but many of them fled, um, this was our so and this was our concern. What happened is this fire didn't it broke out late at night and swept across, and so some of the residents woke up around 11, and when the alarm went off, and some even went downstairs or called downstairs, and they were told to go back to their rooms and that there was nothing to be worried about, and then they woke up later and they smelled smoke and the power was out, and then some of them went downstairs and discovered the staff was gone. Um, and uh, and some of them tried who were able to access their cars went to the garage to try to get their cars, but when the power was out and they couldn't raise the garage doors, and they manually tried to raise them, but it was very difficult, and then embers started flowing into the garage and they were risking setting the cars and other things in the garage on fire, so they lowered them, went back to the lobby, and sat there waiting. And it was very much a debacle in that case.
And I would add that the executive director did make it there around midnight, as along with two employees. One was a maintenance worker, and one was a server in the cafeteria, and they all helped for a time. But the building, the houses were literally blowing up
Around them, yeah.
nearby, and the executive director left with some residents in his car around 3:45 a.m. Um, and never returned. And at Villa Capri, there were 4 on duty. One was a med tech, and then there were 3 caregivers, but one of the caregivers was 8.5 months pregnant. She was on light duty, and another had an injured wrist from a on the job injury. She was on light duty. So there are really only 2 like able-bodied caregivers on duty. And when suddenly the power went out, and they had no training in terms of what to do with the wildfire. They couldn't find emergency supplies. They had a few flashlights, but they're missing batteries. They found a few lanterns. They couldn't find the emergency supplies were behind a locked door. They used their cell phones, which quickly ran out their cell phone batteries. They were concerned that
For
residents would
flashlights,
fall.
yeah.
Yeah, they used their cell phones for flashlights. They had no they couldn't get like cell signals, and ultimately, managers did not come up to help them. The executive director at Villa Capri never showed up. She told them she was coming. They didn't know what to do. There was no evacuation plan. They claimed there was an emergency plan in the desk, but none of them were aware of it or did not consult it. And they hadn't been trained in that. They had been trained how to use a fire extinguisher, which does not work against a wildfire. And so you have this massive wildfire coming at these 2 facilities in the dead of night with untrained employees. And it was really a disaster waiting to happen. And
Yeah.
that's why Paul and I wrote this book. I mean, we want to kind of wake up both people and the industry to the dangers of these climate driven disasters, because a lot of them do not have transportation plans and evacuation plans. At Villa Capri, there were two buses in the back parking lot, and no one knew where the keys were, and the keys were locked inside the activity director's office, and no one knew how to get in there. So they had buses that could have transported maybe half or a little more than half of the residents. They had no way to get even to get all the residents off this hillside.
Yeah.
Wow, I keep saying that a lot. Let me back up. So I'm not sure if you guys know this, but the number of staff they had at Verena and the number of staff at Villa Capri on that given night, was that pretty typical? Do you guys know?
I think at Villa Capri, it was actually more than they usually had, because they had people on light duty. I had heard from residents sometimes they'd only have 2 staff members at night.
For about 62 people, you said.
Yes,
Wow.
with, about 25 in memory care.
Yeah. I mean, we should note that in some states there are staffing requirements, minimum staffing requirements by law. We don't have that in California. And so it was fairly standard staffing needs. But the one thing to point out, as Ann emphasized, I mean, a lot of the people who are working at night were often minimum wage or close to minimum wage employees with very little training. Um, and in both cases, they did reach out to the general managers. As Ann mentioned, Villa Capri's general manager said, "Keep everybody in your rooms. I'm on my way," and she never showed up. We still don't know where she was for 6 hours. We did a lot of research, and it never was clear. And then the general manager of Verena showed up, left with a carload of residents, saying he'd be back. He never came back. And after he left, most of the other staff left as well, except for one maintenance worker who stayed behind to help a woman in a wheelchair. And so it's really in many cases, this book is a story of uh, courage by the people, the staff, and the family members who actually drove up there because they were concerned about their loved ones. They drove over burning branches through smoke to get up there, and they helped in the evacuation with very little, few resources to help them. So it's a dramatic hour by hour account of what happened. But as Ann was mentioning, it's also a story of accountability as the owners of the owners of this retirement complex is a very wealthy, powerful person in town who denied that anything went amiss that night, and there was a state investigation, criminal investigations into what happened. There were some lawsuits filed. They were all settled and sealed, but we were able to get a hold of the depositions before they were sealed, and so we told a story that basically the owners of this place didn't want told. And basically, this was the first real account of what happened up there, and it's dramatic, it's heroic, but at the same time, it's tragic because these seniors were left in harm's way and didn't need to be.
And they were paying for round the clock care. They were paying for someone to take care of them in case of emergencies. And what we found with a lot of these large corporate owned, some are great, some places are great, but there are huge corporations
For profit.
that
Yeah.
own these for profit. And there is a culture of profit, not a culture of safety. And there's a big difference.
These places are very impressive, grandiose chandeliers, majestic dining halls, posh furniture, but there's a Titanic element to this where they're very beautiful settings, furnishings, but not enough lifeboats. And there was essentially they just didn't invest, as Ann said, it was not a culture of safety. They didn't invest a lot of training or facilities for disasters would happen. And in many cases, these types of facilities are loosely regulated. In California, there's no requirement for backup generators at a place like this, and there's just very loose regulations. And we just this to us, this is a cautionary tale.
And some states have a lot of regulations, but not great enforcement of those
Right.
regulations. So there's a patchwork of state by state laws that govern assisted living. And also, one other thing to note is, as you know, there's very high turnover among caregivers. It's a difficult job, and they're the lowest paid. And so you have to have a rigorous training program in order to keep everyone up to date on emergency procedures. And so, for example, the night staff of Villa Capri, their safety trainings were once a month, and they were during the afternoon, when ideally they might be sleeping because they had these nocturnal shifts. So I mean, a simple question to ask is, how do you train your night staff? Like, do you make them come in the afternoon, or do you train them at night when they're there? There are a lot of telltale signs for people who are looking to put family members or to go into assisted living themselves. A lot of questions to ask in terms of the culture of safety.
So that obviously been doing this a long time, done a lot of podcast episodes, talked about a lot of different communities. This brings up obviously a lot of questions, a lot of thought. From what you're telling me, there really wasn't adequate training for the staff, especially in the location where these buildings were. If a fire like this or some other emergency were to happen, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like there wasn't training and or extensive training for the residents in what to do if something like this happened. As you said a little while ago, Anne, there was a hefty charge to be living at these locations that a family or the individual themselves were paying out on a monthly basis. Probably something that a lot of people haven't thought about that Anne just brought up, besides the questions of, and you can see when you walk in, I've been in a myriad of assisted livings, a myriad of independent communities, and as Paul was saying, they can be absolutely beautiful. And your questions are about care, your questions are about the food and how mom or dad will be dealt with. I don't know if a lot of people have really thought about and have asked questions. What would happen if something
Yes.
happens? The one of you guys, go ahead,
Yeah.
Paul.
I was going to say, I think that's the question they need to be asking is what are their evacuation procedures? Do they drill? Do they involve the guests, the residents in their drills? You know, what are their procedures? And those are all key questions. So many these facilities, their default is to tell residents to shelter in place, but with these rising number of catastrophic natural events coming through, like wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes, sheltering in place is no longer the option, and then they need to be ready. They need to have contracts with bus companies to make sure that they get buses up there to evacuate residents. That they have evacuation plans in steady order, that they make sure everybody knows where the keys to the shuttle buses and have training in driving them. And these are the kinds of things that we're missing at Villa Capri and Verena. And you had something?
Yeah, well, I was going to talk about the shelter in place that, that's the training a lot of residents are given. And no residents at Villa Capri had ever been involved in a fire drill. In fact, the staff hadn't been involved in a fire drill. This Villa Capri had 2 stories. And when the elevator was out of commission, the staff had never they had been given a handout on doing a 2-person carry, but they'd never tried to carry residents down the stairs. And many residents there were at least 10 in wheelchairs on the second floor who could not get down the stairs without being carried. And many others that needed a lot of assistance. One resident was injured trying to scoot. He ended up rolling down the stairs. Um, it and then not having Villa Capri did not have an evacuation plan. We looked at we asked, like, is this normal? And we found a facility less than a mile away that
Yeah.
also evacuated that night. And they didn't wait for police or fire to come and tell them that it was time to go. The executive director got up on the roof, looked at where the fire was, and said, "We're out of here." But they had the med charts, they had people's glasses and dentures, and they were clothed and fed, and they had call sheets, three roll call sheets, so they knew which resident went on which bus. At Villa Capri, they didn't know. The residents ended up in 5 different shelters and some in hospitals, and the corporation didn't know where everyone was. They ended up there with
Sometimes for several days.
some of them
Yeah.
ended up getting evacuated without their dentures, without their glasses, without their hearing aids, without any identification, it wrapped in a
And
sheet.
sometimes without clothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Barefoot, without clothing, no medication, no, so it was just complete chaos. And that greatly impacted all the residents. I don't know if we said it, but Villa Capri did burn down. So these residents lost their entire community, all their friends, all their possessions. Many of them had heirlooms, jewelry, things that they had collected their entire life. No one was able to retrieve anything. And then on top of it, they lost their community, and they deteriorated rapidly from the trauma of the botched evacuation.
Yeah, we documented 4 residents from Villa Capri who died within 10 weeks of the fire, and their families directly attribute those deaths to the botched evacuations or injuries that were clearly sustained during the botched evacuations. And so our contention is the death toll from the Tubbs fire should be 26 and not 22, but the county has not changed that number.
Let's address this as we kind of get close to wrapping up. I mean, we'll talk about the aftermath. We'll talk about lessons learned. Folks, you guys hear me all the time. The numbers that I keep on talking about, we have the oldest boomers turning 80. We have over 100 million people. Think about that, 100 million people, over that, in this country that are 50 and older. One of the biggest issues that we're working on within a plan to age is where are we going to house and how are we going to care for all these people? So, what we're talking about today is significant. We have to make
Absolutely.
sure that we have the appropriate housing with the appropriate safety measures to make sure that something like this isn't happening again. You have elderly people, some a little bit younger, some that can't walk, some that may not be able to hear very well, as Paul Ram was talking about. There's a lot of difficulties. How are you going to carry people down the stairs and so on and so forth? So I'm going to ask them about the aftermath. Paul talked about the suits. But as you move forward, ask those questions. If you're working with a placement person, have that question and have that person ask the questions and yourself. What is the plan here? Have the
Yeah.
residents been educated? Has the staff been educated? If you're on the East Coast, hurricanes possibly, more in the central of the country, tornadoes, wildfires up and down California, some huge issues we have to talk about. Can one of you guys or both of you address the aftermath and then hopefully some positive news moving forward?
Ann, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. One of our protagonists, the daughter of one of the residents at Villa Capri, has spent 7 years trying to get legislation through the California uh, Senate and Assembly that would require at least 72 hours of backup power for facilities with 16 beds or more. It did pass the state Senate this year, but then got stalled in the House, and it will be reintroduced. So there is hope on the legislative front. Florida has a law that requires generators at all of these facilities for backup power. We know that in Hurricane Irma, residents at a nursing home died after the heat inside just a lack of power. And I would say that seniors are the most vulnerable in any, whether you're in assisted living, independent living, a nursing home, or at home with caregivers. There needs to, like, seniors need to have emergency plans, and families should, to take care of seniors, because in all the disasters we looked at, they were 60 to 75% of climate disaster victims are people 65 or older.
Yeah. And if I could say one thing just about the aftermath, that is critical. As I noted, the owners of this complex, Oakmont Senior Living, basically denied what happened. In fact, they posted a website where they basically accused the family members who did the rescues of misrepresenting what happened that night, and that's why Ann and I, started digging into it to find out what was the true story. And eventually, the Oakmont Senior Living, after state investigations and where they were forced to acknowledge that residents were abandoned, and that they were forced to take down their website. And they settled these lawsuits, but they sealed them, and they wanted to keep this story quiet. But we were determined. We went in and did over 135 interviews or something like that, and just to hold them accountable. And at one point, their local district attorney, after the state investigation and the lawsuits, our local district attorney looked into criminal charges against them. They ended up reaching a stipulated civil agreement with the district attorney for $500,000. But then 50 days later, uh, the owner of Oakmont Senior Living, Bill Gallagher, turned around and launched a recall campaign against her, spent $1.7 million to try to recall her. And this again inflamed the community, if you will. That's really what our book is all about. So it was an ongoing battle for accountability and truth that went on for several years, and that's really why it took us 5 years to write this book. And it's really a dramatic story about the efforts to just get the truths told. And that's and I do want to add one thing about the legislative front. There was a bill called AB 209. There was an assembly bill that was passed. There was a bill passed in state California right afterward that did require more detailed emergency plans, installing stair chairs in stairwells, making sure that keys are available to staff. But a lot of the requirements were very uh, vague. They required these homes to designate evacuation sites and transportation plans, but there weren't any specifics, and there was really a very weak. It was kind of smoke and mirrors, as one advocate described it. And as Ann mentioned, the key issue is requiring these places to have backup power generators, so people can evacuate safely and operate telephones and all that. And it exists in Florida, but it doesn't exist in California, and we're still trying to push for that.
It actually doesn't exist in most states, and if you think there are many seniors on medical who require medical devices, and so backup power can help power those medical devices,
The
oxygen,
respirators, yeah, oxygen, yeah.
essential things like that.
Wow, this has been an incredible 35 minutes with both of you. Obviously, a lot a lot to still take place within the industry with these communities themselves. Folks, as you're listening to this, please share. As I always say, tell folks around you the same messaging, and it is ask a lot of questions. Ask these questions about
Yes.
safety, ask these questions about training, both for the residents and the staff. It's obviously important. As Paul was saying, we're seeing a lot of different things from a storm perspective, different types of storms happening across the country. And as I talked about a few minutes ago, we have a lot of people to house and take care of as we move forward. So, excuse me, if one of you guys can mention the name of the book again, tell people where they can find it, please.
Yeah, the book is called Inflamed: Abandonment, Heroism, and Outrage in Wine Country's Deadliest Firestorm. And it's available on Amazon. Just look up Inflamed by Ann Belden and Paul Gullickson. And we also have a Facebook page called Inflame the Book that you're welcome to join us there, where we post updated information. And anything else?
Yes, it's also available on Audible in audio form and Kindle format. And if you want to avoid Amazon, it's at bookshop.org as well. And a lot of libraries have it. Yeah. So you can get it in any format.
And if you don't mind, I just want to say we were very honored last year to be recognized as the Book of the Year at the National Conference of Investigative Reporters and Editors conference in LA last year. And that was a wonderful vote of support for our book. So if anybody wants to talk to us about it, please uh, log on to Inflame the Book, and you can send us messages there. We'd love to, or leave your comments on Amazon or Goodreads. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the book.
Very good. And I thank you both for your time this morning. This has been a very intriguing, very important conversation. And folks, as I always say, until we talk again, have yourself an awesome day.